Hey everyone, this is Gary. I'm off for the next few days to hopefully see the solar eclipse, which is going to be passing over the United States, weather permitting. And while I'm away, I've lined up some Encore episodes that, statistically speaking, most of you haven't heard before. I'll be back in just a few days with fresh new episodes for you to enjoy.
Most children growing up are admonished not to take candy from strangers. It's good advice, but it isn't advice that comes from nowhere. It actually came from a particular incident over 150 years ago that shocked the world and changed how we view children's safety. It was an event, the echoes of which can be seen today in efforts to find abducted children. Learn more about the kidnapping of Charley Ross on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily.
This episode is sponsored by ButcherBox. If you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you know I like to share some of the creations I've made with my ButcherBox shipments. Today I want to tell you about my latest creation, meat muffins. I take a package of ButcherBox ground beef and mix it with shredded cheese. I then put it in a cupcake tin, filling it about 3/4 of the way full, and then on top I'll pour a scrambled egg mix. I put it in my air fryer for about 13 minutes at 390 degrees, and the result is ground beef muffins. Quick and easy to make, and you can put them in the fridge for later. And if you'd like to try this recipe out yourself, you are in luck, because today ButcherBox is giving my listeners free ground beef for the life of your membership, plus an additional $20 off your first order. Use my link, butcherbox.com/everywhere, and use code everywhere to get free ground beef for life, plus $20 off your first box. That's butcherbox.com/everywhere, code everywhere. This episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, your passport to untold stories and hidden histories. As the largest online newspaper archive, newspapers.com offers an incredible journey through time, with papers dating back to 1690. Imagine exploring the news, events, and everyday moments that shape the history of the world around us. Newspapers.com puts over 900 million pages at your fingertips, offering a front row seat to the past. With papers from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and beyond, Newspapers.com lets you walk the streets of history, whether it's London during the Blitz, New York during Prohibition, or Sydney during the construction of the Harbour Bridge. For listeners of today's episode, Newspapers.com is extending a special offer. Use the code EVERYTHINGEVERYWHERE and enjoy a 20% discount on a subscription. That's everything everywhere at newspapers.com. It's the perfect way to unlock the world of history.
The kidnapping of a child is an event that occurs infrequently, but when it does happen, it gains a great deal of attention. Every so often in the news, you'll hear terrible reports of children who go missing, and in some cases, they're unsolved investigations that can last for years. The case of Charles Lindbergh Jr., of which I've done a previous episode, was probably the highest profile case in American history. However, when that case hit the headlines, it always referenced another case which came before it. The first major case of a child kidnapping, the case which brought the issue to the public's attention, occurred over 150 years ago in the city of Philadelphia. It occurred in 1874 in the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia. Germantown was one of the nicer areas of the city, and the people who lived there were amongst some of the upper crust of Philadelphia society. The Ross family was one such family in Germantown. Christian Ross and his wife lived in Germantown with their 7 children: Stoughton, Harry, Sophia, Walter, Charlie, Marion, and Annie. The 2 youngest boys, Walter and Charlie, were 6 and 4 years old respectively, and were constant playmates. On June 27, 1874, the 2 boys were playing outside their home when 2 men in a carriage pulled up. They began talking to the 2 boys, offered them candy, and left without incident. The 2 men appeared each day for the next several days, talking to the boys, giving them some candy, and leaving without incident. On July 1st, the men showed up again in a buggy and talked to the boys. This time, however, having built up a rapport with them over several days, they invited them to come with them to get fireworks and candy. The 2 boys entered the carriage and were taken to a store. Walter, the older of the 2, was given 25 cents and told to go into the store to buy fireworks, while Charlie and the 2 men waited outside. Walter went into the store, but when he returned, his brother and the 2 men were gone. Walter panicked and started to cry. He eventually got the attention of a stranger named Henry Peacock, who took him home to his father. His father immediately suspected what had happened. He asked their neighbors if they saw anything. Several of them saw the boys get into the carriage, but no one saw them drop off Walter at the store and leave with Charley. Charley's mother was in Atlantic City recovering from an illness, but she soon found out what happened when she read the advertisements her husband put in local newspapers for their son's return. There was immediate speculation on who might have taken young Charley. Some figured a relative took the boy due to a family squabble. Others blamed gypsies, and still others pointed the finger at Charley's father, who figured it was a way to get attention. On July 3rd, a ransom letter arrived at the Ross home. It had been mailed from Philadelphia. The letter was filled with misspellings and grammatical errors. It read, quote, "Mr. Ross, be not uneasy, your son Charley be all writ. We has got him, and no powers on earth can deliver out of our hand. You will have to pay us before you get him from us, and pay us a big cent too. If you put the cops hunting for him, you is only defeating you own end. We has got him put so no living power can get him from us alive. If any approach is made to his hiding place, that is a signal for his instant annihilation. If you regard his life, put no one to search for him, you money can fetch him out alive, and no other existent powers. Don't deceive yourself and think that detectives can get him from us, for that is impossible. You hear from us in few days." End quote. And I tried to read that as accurately as I could, given the spelling. The police in Philadelphia and the surrounding area began a manhunt to find Charley. They went door to door and searched houses, usually without a warrant. People who objected were put under suspicion. They searched boats going in and out of Philadelphia and found a lot of stolen property, but not the boy. Families in the area kept their kids locked up inside to protect them. Several prominent Philadelphia citizens even recruited the Pinkerton Detective Agency to help find the boy. On July 6th, another letter arrived. This one requested that the family pay $20,000 for the boy's return, the equivalent of $400,000 today. The problem was the kidnappers totally misjudged the Ross family. While they did have a nice house in a nice part of town, and Mr. Ross owned a general goods store, he was heavily in debt, having lost money in the stock market. He didn't have $20,000 on hand. The kidnappers told Mr. Ross that if he wanted to communicate, he was to place a classified ad in the Philadelphia Telegram with the following, quote, "Rouse, we are ready to negotiate," end quote. Over the course of the next several weeks, Christian Ross and the kidnappers continued to communicate in this fashion. Ross was encouraged by the police to keep stringing the kidnappers along to hopefully get some information that could be used to capture them. In total, 23 letters were sent by the kidnappers. There was one elaborate request for delivering the money, which involved painting a suitcase white, sitting on the back of a train, and waiting for a signal along the tracks. Mr. Ross took the train trip, but never saw the signal. The kidnappers read a newspaper article that published some erroneous information and canceled the deal. Eventually, communications with the kidnappers ceased. The last letter was sent from New York. In the meantime, little Charley had become a cause celeb. There was a popular song written called "Bring Back Our Little Darling," and newspapers couldn't get enough of the story. The story eventually cooled off as there were no new updates. Charley was still missing, and the police had no clues. In August, the New York City police had a possible lead in the case and requested to see the ransom letters to compare the handwriting. An informant had come forward to the police to testify that he was approached by two men in April about a plot to kidnap a child from the Vanderbilt family and hold it for $50,000 ransom. The informant provided detailed descriptions of the two men's faces, which were corroborated by Charley's brother Walter, who had seen them. The two men were William Mosher and Joseph Douglas. Mosher had a criminal record and was actually a fugitive at the time of the kidnapping. Both men had been living in Philadelphia, not that far away from the Ross home, and both had left to live in New York around the time when the ransom messages began to be sent from New York. Many neighbors in Philadelphia also reported seeing a carriage similar to the one which picked up Walter and Charley at Mosher's house. The police and the Pinkertons began to look for the two men, but they couldn't be found. The search for Mosher and Douglas ended on December 13th, when the home of the New York Supreme Court Justice Charles Van Brunt was robbed. The men robbing the home were still in the premises when an alarm bell was sounded, alerting Justice Van Brunt's brother, who lived next door. He assembled a small group of armed men and confronted the robbers, shooting both of them. The two men were William Mosher and Joseph Douglas. Mosher was killed instantly, and Douglas was shot and mortally wounded. Knowing that his death was near, Joseph Douglas made a confession. He reportedly said, quote, "Men, I won't lie to you. My name is Joseph Douglas, and the man over there is William Mosher. He lives in New York, and I have no home. I am a single man and have no relatives except a brother and a sister whom I have not seen for 12 years. Mosher is married and has 4 children. I have $40 in my pocket that I made honestly. Bury me with that. Also, men, I am dying now, and it's no use lying. Mosher and I stole Charley Ross." End quote. Charley's brother Walter had identified one of the kidnappers with a distinctive facial feature that was never released to the public. He told the police that he had, quote, "a monkey nose." Walter was brought to identify the 2 dead men and confirm that they were the ones that picked up him and his brother. Mosher had a deformed nose. His body was also identified by one of their neighbors who saw the boys go into the carriage. There was another associate of Mosher and Douglas named William Westervelt who was a police officer in Philadelphia. He was actually tried for the kidnapping, but there was no evidence to link him to the crime. Even though the crime was seemingly wrapped up, there was still the issue of where little Charley was. With both of the kidnappers now dead, there was no way to find out where Charley was located. When Douglas gave his confession, he said that Mosher was the only one who knew the location of the boy. No one knew if Charley was dead or alive. Charley Ross was never found, and what happened to him remains a mystery to this day, over 150 years after he was taken. The kidnapping of Charley Ross was the first kidnapping for ransom in American history. There had been previous child kidnapping cases, but in those cases the kidnapper only intended to collect the reward money. In February 1875, the Pennsylvania legislature passed the first kidnapping law in the country. Charley's mother and father spent the rest of their lives looking for their son. His father wrote a book and gave lectures just to raise money to continue the search. His father passed away in 1897 and his mother in 1912. They talked to 570 men who claimed to have been Charley. For over 60 years after the disappearance of Charley Ross, people came forward who claimed that they were him. The most notable case was that of a 74-year-old man named Gustav Blair, who had a court in Arizona legally declare him to be Charley Ross in 1939. The surviving family members refused to contest it, having dealt with thousands of other claimants over the decades. Later, DNA tests confirmed that there was no way he could have been Charley Ross. The legacy of the kidnapping of Charley Ross endures to this day. The admonition of "don't take candy from strangers" comes directly from the Charley Ross incident. Today, most people have no idea who Charley Ross was, but child abductions are still a major concern. In the 80s and 90s, photos of missing children were put on milk cartons. It was replaced by the Amber Alert system, which is a network that uses broadcast media and text messages to alert people when children go missing. And the Global Missing Children's Network is an international system to disseminate information on missing children. While there were other high-profile abduction cases that brought these modern programs into existence, it was the kidnapping of 4-year-old Charley Ross in 1874 that first brought the issue to the attention of the public.
The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Benji Long and Cameron Kieffer. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon, including the show's producers. Your support helps me put out a show every single day. And also, Patreon is currently the only place where Everything Everywhere Daily merchandise is available to the top tier of supporters. If you'd like to talk to other listeners of the show and members of the Completionist Club, you can join the Everything Everywhere Daily Facebook group or Discord server. Links to everything are in the show notes.